Welcome, and let's talk about Pro12 expansion. I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, so welcome and thank you for joining me and watching me today. Please feel free to add comments in if you're watching on podcast on Periscope, or if you're watching on YouTube, hey, have mentions below. So it's recently come out that Pro12 are looking at expanding into the USA. Well, that's not new news, but the details around where and how they're going to do it is. So they're looking at Toronto in Canada and Houston in the USA. Now these are two locations that I heard about on the rumour mill a couple of months ago. So this is something that obviously is a little bit advanced and won't be just sort of first preliminary meetings. There will have been some sort of chat and some sort of due diligence done already, you would hope. They're looking at launching these in 2018, which coincidentally is the same time as Major League Rugby is talking about launching. And if you want to know about Major League Rugby, I did a video on them last week, so just have a quick look either on YouTube or lower in the Periscope. So, coincidentally, that is also when the sanctioning agreement that Pro Rugby has with USA Rugby runs out. So I think with two leagues looking at getting involved in the USA and kicking off in 2018, we can expect USA Rugby is going to give its 180-day cancellation notice to Pro Rugby, and that is, if it's not dead already, is probably going to be dead relatively soon. It's kind of interesting on the locations and how how Pro12 are looking at expanding. They are looking at going to the USA, which is its fastest growing team sport, and obviously there is a lot of cash there, and also Canada, which is also another major market, rather than looking at further expansion into Europe. Obviously Georgia and Romania are two obvious locations you'd look at, but both haven't got major markets and so probably wouldn't bring in the cash. But the interesting one that they haven't sort of talked about is Germany. It's one that the guys on Egg Chasers podcast have also mentioned, but Germany is on the rise rugby-wise. They beat Romania recently and are definitely in with a shot of qualifying to the Rugby World Cup. So it's interesting that the expansion is only out to the States and not also looking at Europe. The other point to look at is looking at the structure that they're talking about. So they're talking about expanding up to obviously 14 teams and splitting it into two conferences of 7. And each conference would play everyone in your own conference twice, and you play everyone in the other conference once. Now, where have we heard that before? Yep, it's a very similar structure to what we have in Super Rugby, except it's more evenly balanced. And that really hasn't worked in Super Rugby, and so I think there needs to be a look and lessons learned from Super Rugby as to why they've had such problems with that over here. The communication and the way they work with the sort of get the media out to the fans is going to have to be clear. It's going to have to be well thought. It's going to have to be inclusive, because the way that it's been done in Super Rugby, it always comes out late. The coaches etc. say they've not been talked to, and it doesn't feel like it's been inclusive. It feels like it's been dictatorial. And so I think one of the things that Pro12 needs to learn is to get this out early, which it looks like they're doing already, because we're talking about 2018-2019 season. We're only in the 16-17 season, so we've got another full season and a half to go before the season starts. And as long as they get their communication strategy right, this is something that I think could work. But they do need to talk about it with them. It also gives them the opportunity to expand more. Why not go to 3 conferences or 4 conferences? It's a way that when we've looked at Super Rugby, or when I've talked about Super Rugby before, it's a way that you can see it expanding. You can see that Pro12 could do the same thing. But whereas Super Rugby is struggling with growing pains and thinking about contraction rather than expansion, Pro12 has managed to get into the States, or looks like it's getting into the States, ahead of Super Rugby and beating them to it, which in the long term could be very beneficial for the Pro12. So I think this is a very, I don't see there's many negatives here. This is one of the reasons that Canada wasn't going to give Pro Rugby an exclusive deal, a sanctioning agreement, and why Pro Rugby, the expansion into Canada, died fairly early on. So you can see that Canada's fully behind this. You'd expect their team to be pretty much a national team, or all players that aren't sort of contracted on big contracts in Europe. The USA one, it's much. I think it's much less clear at the moment as to as to who would be able to play for that, and how it would fit in around Major League Rugby. We still don't know what kind of season Major League Rugby are looking at running. If they were to run a Super Rugby season in the same way that Pro Rugby did, then potentially players could play in both leagues. Obviously, the player burnout would have to be, player welfare would have to be managed there, but there's still a lot of questions around that. So interesting that it's come out now into the main press. I saw it in the Scotsman. I'm sure it's in many other news outlets about this expansion. But on the whole, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. But I would like. I think Pro Rugby should. Sorry, not Pro. I think the Pro 12 should also be looking at Germany. I think that would be another really good opportunity for them. Again, a bit like when we were talking, when I've talked about Argentina in the past. I think Argentina needs to get more than one Super Rugby franchise, especially if they're going to only pick their national team from locally based players. So you'd want this to be a starting point for the USA and Canada, not the end sort of model. In which case, that 14-team league, we've got to be looking at that going to at least 16, if not more, with other countries, with other teams coming in. So that's my thoughts on the Pro 12 expansion into North America, both Canada and the USA. Please let me know your thoughts if you're watching on YouTube down in the comments, or if you've seen this via Twitter, then do tweet me as well. Please do like it, share it, etc. And also sign up for my newsletter. Cheers, thanks everybody. Have a great week.